Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Welcome to Civics in a Year. I am super stoked about my guest today because my guest today is my colleague, Jeff Davis. Jeff is the program director for civic education at the Center for American Civics at Arizona State University. And he recently wrote a piece in Fair for All, which I will put in our show notes. But today we're talking about kind of the rise of political violence. So Jeff, welcome to the show. And our opening question is, what does the rise of political violence in America reveal about the health of our democracy and the challenges of living up to our constitutional principles?
Well, thanks for that welcome, Liz. It's great to be with you too. In this context, I'm so excited to be on the Civics in a Year podcast. And great question. We have something very timely to discuss because it does seem like there is this rising tide of political violence that our country has started to experience. Certainly, the most recent episode with the assassination of Charlie Kirk has been on everybody's mind. Although even more recently, there was an attempted attack on ICE agents that appears to have been politically motivated with the little that we know so far. And looking back just the last couple of years, we've got incidents where Democratic lawmakers were attacked in their homes, both in Congress and in state legislatures. We had a presidential candidate who there was an attempted assassination against. All of this seems to point to an idea that Americans are just not seeing the ordinary constitutional means of practicing politics as the ways to resolve differences, that there's something, greater that needs to be done in which violence is justified because people who are not wanting the same thing as me in our policymaking, they're enemies. Right. And that's not a view that overwhelming majorities of Americans are holding, certainly not. But there are these signs of extreme minorities of each of our sides in partisanship who think that violence is the better means to the end. And that's not healthy. That's not what the Constitution was designed to provide for us.
And it feels like there's so much dehumanizing, right, of the other side. And I know that viewers can't see, but I just put that in air quotes. So why is it so dangerous to dehumanize or collectively blame political opponents? And how does that really undermine the principles of free speech and equal protection?
Yeah, you're totally right about that. It doesn't take a ton of time hanging out on social media or watching 24-hour news networks or other, YouTube channels, podcasts, et cetera. It's not hard to find people talking about political opponents, or at least people that they disagree with in public policy, as enemies, as dangerous, as they label with terms like communist or fascist, suggesting some kind of like extremist ideology that's not committed to the democratic republic under the Constitution, and all of that. You're right, it's super dangerous. It serves to justify that the ordinary political practices are no longer going to work, right? If somebody else is an enemy who is seeking to undermine our way of life or the institutions that we've become accustomed to living with, then anything goes, right? That's what justifies things like the extremely counter-majoritarian or extra constitutional mechanisms to stop them from having any policymaking power, is because if they're out to get me and people like me, if they're out to get my way of life, if they're out to undo the constitutional fabric themselves, well, then I'm justified and my side is justified in undoing the constitutional fabric to stop them from doing it. Well, that's the whole point of the Constitution, is that as we are going about our political differences, our founders knew that people are always going to have differences of opinion in politics, right? There's always going to be disagreements about what the tax rate should be, how properties get transferred, what the regulations on business should be, what, gun laws, or et cetera, et cetera. You could go to any particular issue. And the whole point of the constitutional system is that we resolve those differences in various institutions at various levels, local, state, and federal, through debate, through deliberation, through persuasion, right? And if your side's losing and it's not getting its way in policy right now, your job is to make the case and persuade others that your way of thinking is actually more valid. And here are the reasons why. What we lose when we start talking about people as enemies and justifying violence or extra constitutional mechanisms to block the other side from doing anything is we're giving up on that idea of persuasion, right? We're suggesting that that other side, they're beyond hope, they cannot be persuaded, and that justifies all kinds of terrible things that undo the fabric of our constitutional republic.
And I think that one of the things I have learned in my teaching career, when we talk about free speech is never meant to be absolute. And so I think that the founders, when they thought of free speech, was the freedom to disagree and the freedom to have these conversations and criticize your government. And it almost feels like, and again, I understand that social media is a business, right? We understand that rage baiting is a business now because that's what people click on, and it makes it feel more divisive. And this, call for, well, I have the freedom of speech, I can say whatever I want, is becoming this dehumanizing thing, instead of, like you said, like you and I disagree about where we're going to go to lunch one day, right? And instead of calling each other names and saying these mean things and claiming freedom of speech should be a back and forth. And I'm trying to persuade you why my side is better and you're trying to persuade me. And I mean, if that's a very low-hanging fruit example, but this freedom of speech is supposed to be a principle of, really good argument and disagreement. We think about the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalists, and they were not always nice to each other, but for the most part, it was this really thought out back and forth. So as we look toward America 250, so we're getting ready to celebrate that, how can civic education help renew our commitment to persuasion, deliberation, and elections as the way to settle our political disputes?
Yeah, there's the real question, huh? And for you and me in our center, and for the work that so many other great civic educators are doing in our K-12 schools and various nonprofits out there, we can do something about this. There really is hope here. And personally, I think that the best approach is to teach students when they are in our classrooms some of the art of respectful civil dialogue, and to show them that persuasion actually is possible. It is okay for someone to change their minds. People do change their minds all the time. And we can demonstrate the practices of what it looks like to express an opinion with sound argument, reason, evidence, personal experience, laying out how it's going to affect me and the other people I know who are in my situation, but also to listen to what the others have to say, and not to listen for waiting for the moment where you can poke the hole in the argument or prove them to be hypocrites or something, but to listen, to try to understand first, right? And to really know okay, are they coming from a reasonable place, and can I understand why? And once you get to that point, once we show students that persuasion is possible, I think that undoes a lot of the demonization and characterization of other people's enemies, because civic friendship is about believing that if we currently disagree, that doesn't mean we have to always disagree, and it also doesn't mean that the other person isn't sharing in a rightful place as an equal partner in this constitutional experiment that we've been doing. So in your lunch example, which I think is wonderful, we can attack each other about the lunch choice. The result of that is going to be that neither one of us is that we end up splitting up and going our separate ways and eating alone, right? That's not going to be a fun experience. In a perfect world, maybe I get my way, maybe you get your way, but more likely what we get is a compromise where we pick a lunch spot that we're both kind of going to enjoy and we'll enjoy each other's company. Or alternately, maybe we work it out that this time we'll go to your place and next time we'll go to my place. And we strike a deal where both of us are going to, win in the long run. And that's what civic friendship is. It's a belief that we're going to continue in this American constitutional experiment together, regardless of whether I'm getting my way right now. In the long run, we're all going to be better off because we have these protections under the Constitution and because we're resolving these differences peacefully. And we always believe that there's hope for the future, that next time around we can be a little more persuasive, we can come with a little more reason, and maybe that will persuade enough people that we win the next election and get our way next time around. And that's how we resolve our differences in this system.
And it's interesting that you say, sometimes I'll get my way, you'll get your way, or we'll compromise. But also in that whole thing, we're talking about the idea of lunch. You're not attacking me as a person. I'm not attacking you, right? We're looking at the lunch idea. And this is, I think, especially in politics, and you bring up teaching it in classrooms, which I do know is your doctoral research. And I'm stoked to read that. But it is attacking the idea and not the person.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
And that becomes, because we're all neighbors, we're all human beings, I actually don't think you and I have ever disagreed about where to go to lunch because we also work on a very large campus. So there is a plethora of things. But, in that lunch example, if we, attack each other and end up eating by ourselves, it's not like we come back and everything's fine, right? It creates a divide that unfortunately can get bigger and bigger instead of just, I'm going to give up a little bit of what I want. You're going to give up a little bit of what you want. And it helps, progress things along. I'm going to ask one more question. So if I am a consumer of social media, right? So whether I'm a student or a teacher or a member of the community, how can I be a better consumer of social media with kind of all of this dehumanization and finger pointing going on?
That's a tough question for sure to navigate in the world right now, because the tough part is that we don't have a ton of control over what gets fed to us on a social media feed. And so you really have to make some deliberate decisions about how you want to go about that consumption. You certainly could take the approach that you just kind of watch yourself and police like what you see coming across your feed. And if you see stuff that an algorithm is feeding to you that's particularly, negative about like actual people, not about their ideas, but just like attacking them as though they're not worthy of protection or worthy of participation in freedom of speech in some way. Maybe it is the right thing to do to just kind of block those voices and try to remove them and stick to those that are talking about ideas. That's one approach. Personally, I like to avoid going to algorithmic sources altogether. I like to have, if I'm going to consume news digitally, a variety of sources that I go to where I go to the homepage of the source. Maybe it's, sometimes the New York Times, sometimes the Fox News main space, sometimes it's the Wall Street Journal, sometimes the Arizona Republic for us locally, maybe it's CNN, pick a variety of them and go to the homepages, because you're not at that point being fed, the algorithm of what's been decided you're most likely to be interested in, but you're getting their best effort at trying to appeal to a wider audience. Now, of course, each of these sites, we know that there are audiences that gravitate toward certain sites. But if you go to the opinion section, or if you go to the front news pages of these sections, you'll tend to find a variety of news stories contained in the news headlines, and you'll tend to find a variety of types of perspectives in the opinion section, especially if you're going to multiple sources. So that's something I would encourage, like rather than just passively accepting what an algorithm feeds you on social media when it comes to your news consumption.
I love that, because my algorithm right now is Taylor Swift. It is videos of dogs, and it is the WNBA finals and college football. Like that.
Hey, they know you. They know what you love, Liz.
That is what. So I love that you say, like, maybe just not get our news from there. And if you start to feel like, if you start to get caught in that blame, like stopping. And I appreciate that you talk about going straight to the source and going straight to these homepages. All Sides, again, friend of the center, is a really good place to go. Jeff, thank you so much for being our guest. And I know this won't be the last time. And listeners, I'm going to put the piece of writing that Jeff did for Fair for All in the show notes. Highly suggest it. Jeff and I are working really hard on civic education and trying to give teachers and students in our community as much as possible. So Jeff, thank you so much for being my guest, and thank you for your expertise.
You're very welcome. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.